Okay. All right, ladies, we are going live. Uh, Pamela Taylor Johnson will be joining us very shortly. She's going to end up having to join from her phone, which is totally okay. Of course, we would prefer to see her beautiful, lovely face live and in living color with the rest of us. Um, but that's okay. Oh, wait, look. Oh, that's Jane. Uh, Chandler that logged in. Okay, all right, so we have Jane Chandler, who always enjoys the roundtable discussions that we do. And so she's actually in Zoom. Uh, I will also keep up with those that make comments inside of the Facebook comment thread. And so now we'll get started as we wait for the awesome, amazing retired judge Pamela Taylor Johnson to join us by phone. Thank you, ladies, for joining me with this roundtable talk for the month of March. This month's focus is women's history from a local perspective. And so this is part of an initiative I started as Madam Vice President of the East Baton Rouge Parish School System. I started the 2021 Culture and Diversity Reader, and simply put, the Culture and Diversity Reader is an initiative to explore the interweaving of our collective cultures and gain a greater appreciation of ourselves and one another. Each month offers several selections. Try one or try them all if you have time. Add them to your circulation in an existing book club. Grab tea or coffee and chat about them with a close friend or reflect on your own. Okay. I started this because, as we all know, uh, nationally and locally, there's a lot of tension and division um, in society right now, and so sometimes that makes it difficult. Okay, we have her. Let me promote her to a panelist. All right, welcome, Judge Johnson. Welcome, retired Judge Johnson. um, I'm just doing the introduction and the welcome. So, as I was saying, uh, this is part of the initiative. I started as Madam Vice President of East Baton Rouge Parish Schools, um, just to get people talking and get folks to a place where we're not so rooted in our own individual opinions and perspective that we objectify folks. um, it's important that we um, figure out a way to get past the bipartisanship or the racial tension and the tension between the genders, etc. So on that note, each month focuses on a different topic. And so last month, quite naturally, was Black History Month. And so there were 4 readings suggested for that month. This month, there are 3 readings around women's history. One is around Hidden Figures. Everybody, I'm sure, has seen the movie. If you haven't, you better. But there's also a book. So that's one of the recommended readings. Then I picked up a new one called Anonymous is a Woman, a Global Chronicle of Gender Equality. And it does a pretty good job crossing diverse cultures from Arab and Muslim to Asian to African American to African. Different women across the globe from spanning different time periods. So for example, one is Kentucky Amanerinas. Excuse me, she's an Ethiopian. She was an Ethiopian from the 60s and 50s BCE, queen and defender of the kingdom of Kush against Roman aggression. And one other, just to show you the diversity here, is Wang Zhenyi. She was Chinese from the 1768, from the 1700s, and she was an astronomer and mathematician, explicited lunar and solar eclipses. So great range of diversity. I highly recommend it. I've enjoyed it. It is beautifully illustrated. And then last but not least recommended But this month, and I'll go into a little bit of detail. My own words, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm thoroughly enjoying this as a woman that takes pride in my heritage, and the things that women have contributed. And as a law school student myself, enjoying this a great deal. So with that, what I want to do is let the ladies go ahead and introduce themselves who are joining me. And I must say, and I mentioned this when I invited you ladies to join me today. I am thoroughly honored to have you all with me. I consider each and every one of you trailblazers and history makers in your own right. And so I'm honored and glad to have you with me. If we can get Sister Jennifer Jones Bridgett to introduce herself briefly.
Hi, I'm Reverend Jennifer Jones. I serve at Shiloh Baptist Church as Minister of Social Justice. Also, I lead our charitable foundation as the Executive Director. I'm a retired faith-based community organizer. I've done that for the last 30 years and still somewhat involved from the transition work with what was formerly known as PICO, which is now Faith in Action.
Thank you so much, Sister Bridgett. And can I get Sister Aileen Hendricks to give a brief introduction of herself?
Primarily right now, I'm the founding artistic director of Laval Theater Company, which is Louisiana Voices of Women. I incorporated it in 2013, August 30th, and I retired from Southern University after 23 years in 2014, January. And so I have focused on social justice and women for years and years and years, and in Baton Rouge.
Thank you, ma'am. And Sister Pamela Taylor Johnson, can you introduce yourself, please, ma'am? And I'm gonna unmute you because I know you're having technical difficulty.
Hi, I am Pamela Taylor Johnson. I am a retired judge, not former. Former judge make it seem as if I was removed for bad conduct. No.
Right, and I meant to, I thought about that when I set it up and I meant to rename it. So let me rename it right now. Yes, ma'am.
I retired from the bench here in East Baton Rouge Parish after 25 years serving on the court with the juvenile jurisdiction. Prior to that, I served as an education lawyer, actually general counsel for the State Department of Education. So I've been involved in education law for a long time in social justice. So those are the things. So I've always been interested in justice, social justice. And to be frankly honest with you, I have not concentrated so much on specifically women because there are so many inequities as it relates to people, and particularly people of color. So that's been the focus, because as we look at it and we look at women, women of color, we have had less barriers than men of color.
Okay. And then Sister Elizabeth Dent Sumrall.
Well, I'm delighted like you and honored as you are, Dawn, to be a part of this informative discussion with such a distinguished group of women. And I've done a lot in the workplace. I started in retail as a teenager, then a secretary, then went back to college, got my degree, and I was a teacher, and then was in the State Department of Education, and then had my own consulting business. And I was president of Financial and Management Services for over 35 years. So one day I was at a meeting and they started saying, everybody stand, and then how long you've been in the workforce, and 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and I was the last woman standing in a group of about 300 women. So I'm probably the senior member of this group today. But I was so blessed. I was so blessed to have worked with Fortune 500 companies and also small businesses over the years. And I traveled all over the United States. I had some really great clients. I learned, and I was in a man's world at the time because they didn't have a lot of women in the workplace. I've also had my own radio show, my own television feature called Senior Moment, by the way, as the years went on. And I, like you, Dawn, am very concerned about the divisiveness in our country. And I was reminded as I prepared to join you all today of my lead-in to my radio show. It was in the 1980s. It was a talk show on WJBO called Talk of the Town. And my lead-in included no fussing, fighting, blaming, or shaming. And that was several decades ago. And unfortunately, we're still fussing, fighting, blaming, and shaming. So I hope in some way that I can continue to try to contribute to bridge those divides. And I'm delighted to be here with you all today.
Thank you, ladies, so much for joining me. As I mentioned earlier, each of you I admire very much, and you have each touched a special place in my heart, which is why I reached out to you. So I will just briefly lift up my own words by the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And first just point out how it's set up, and clarify that this is not an autobiography so much as it is a collection of all of her writings, starting as early as the age of 13. So she was very insightful and very articulate even at a young age. And so it's broken up into different parts. The first part is early years and the lighter side. Part 2 deals with tributes to way pavers and path makers. Part 3 deals on gender equality, women in the law. Part 4 deals with, a judge becomes a justice, and so more into her work as a Supreme Court justice. She then goes into part 5 that deals specifically with her opinions, the justice on judging and justice. And one thing that stood out for me, myself, I obviously relate to her more as a woman justice, but she does go into detail about her Jewish experience as well. And so I thought that was significant. One thing I would like to just read a quick excerpt, and I actually discussed this with my younger sister. I was an only child for 11 years. Along came Chanet, my sister, my lovely, beautiful younger sister, and we were discussing it, this particular excerpt that she had about an experience she keenly remembers between her grandfather and her uncle, or rather she keenly remembers her mother's description of it. And so she shared that her mother told her story about Celia's Orthodox father, including a childhood memory of what started out as a happy Saturday afternoon. Celia watched her brother ride his shiny new bicycle, which he had bought with hard-earned dollars and dimes, but the happy afternoon dissolved into an anger and tear-filled evening when their father destroyed the bicycle with an axe as punishment for bike riding on the Sabbath. And Ruth could not understand in those days when only Jewish boys were ushered into adulthood with a religious celebration. When they turned 13, why her cousin Richard got to have a bar mitzvah, but there was no comparable ceremony for me. And that excerpt was preceded a little bit about her talking about that the different dynamics that she had to juggle as both a woman and then a woman that grew up in a Jewish Orthodox home. And so I found that to be very insightful to her history and what informed her, the way she viewed things and the way she practiced law and then judged. And so then, did anyone want to share any thoughts about Ruth Bader, the notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg? I know when I reached out to retired Judge Pamela Taylor Johnson, she mentioned she had the privilege of actually meeting the justice. And so, Judge Johnson, would you like to share that experience?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to meet Ruth Bader Ginsburg prior to her becoming a judge in any court. In fact, she was a law professor, and I was in undergraduate school, and we had a course called Women and the Law. And it was just something I was doing to hang around and stay an extra semester in college, because I'd really finished all of my courses and found out I was too young to do anything else. So I decided to hang around another year. And I was an accounting major. So I got involved in that course and then met a couple lawyers, a lawyer named Tanya Banks, who had been taught by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she invited her down to Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi, for our Women and the Law conference. And that was so impactful upon me. I was going on to graduate school to get an MBA, and then I started hanging out with these ladies, not with Professor Banks, and decided that I wanted to go to law school. And that's how I get to law school. I'd grown up watching Perry Mason, but not really thought about going to law school. And I started hanging out with these ladies, not with Professor Banks, and decided that I wanted to go to law school. So that's my experience of having met her. And also it's just, and through the years, having followed her, including but not limited to her being appointed as a judge and then going to be appointed to the Supreme Court. So it was just a wonderful experience for me. And she has been had a huge impact on my life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, that's a powerful experience. And I think it illustrates ways in which people have influence over each other and inspire each other that sometimes we don't even realize we have. I mean, how many women did she inspire in that way that she just didn't even know about? So thank you so much for sharing that. Did anybody have any other thoughts before we get into some thoughtful questions and discussions around women's history from a local perspective and, beyond sharing about late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Well, I haven't read the book, but now I'm really very interested in it. I really respected her sense of fashion, in a man's world. And as I sat here already on the Zoom, I thought I wish I would have put on one of my favorite pins in her honor, because she always she looked like a lady, and she was in a man's world. One of the things I did Google and learned a lot about the book, but one of the things that she had to learn to do was collaborate with men and work with men to reach consensus and mutually respect each other. And I'm reminded of my first experience working with a big Fortune 500 company, a plant down the river, and I was the only female in the group. And the vice president with whom I was working looked at me when we were talking about going to lunch, and she said, does she have to come along with a group of men? And he became my most wonderful friend and advocate. And that was quite an experience for me, because there weren't many women engineers in the 1980s. There weren't many women. All women were secretaries and working in the most women were secretaries working in support in the support system. And of course, secretaries are very important also.
Yes.
But I really respect Ruth Ginsburg that she was so successful and had a supportive husband, which my deceased husband was also very supportive. We were business partners for over 35 years. And those are really important elements that help women to make a difference in our society.
Thank you for sharing that. And you actually reminded me, excuse my faux pas with the camera. You actually reminded me of the part in the book where where they share her relationship with Justice Scalia. And
Mhm.
a lot of people don't know, while they may know that they actually were good friends, despite their very different political views, a lot of people may not know that when he was called, as it was time to consider who to recommend for confirmation, he was asked, well, which one do you prefer, this conservative male or that conservative male? And he said he wanted Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so then that's when she was recommended for confirmation. And I thought that kind of blew my mind a little, that
Yeah.
it was so different in so many ways. But he saw enough of her talent and her demeanor to recommend her over folks who are more aligned with his ideology, excuse me. And so with that, if there are no other comments specific.
Well, I'd like to make one. And I'm going to confess. I was born in New York and I lived in Brooklyn, growing up in Flatbush, which is where Ruth Bader Ginsburg comes from. And I grew up in apartments, and a lot of Jewish people lived in apartments. My Girl Scout troop was Jewish. I was the only Gentile. And so, while I have not read her book, I had an experience she talks about her Jewishness. And when I was a teenager, I had a woman who was a Jewish woman who was like a second mother or older sister to me. She had been in Auschwitz, and so had her husband. And she influenced me greatly. One of the things, she spoke 4 languages. She was highly intelligent. And with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Scalia probably recognized her intelligence and her understanding of what I would call justice, the foundation of this country. So I'm going to read the book, obviously. Now that you turned me onto it, you taught me.
And then to your point, she did talk a little bit about her experience in the neighborhood that she grew up in.
Yeah.
And similar experiences to what we know to be common in the African American experience, for example, where there were a couple of times folks were told not to play with her, type of thing.
Right.
So it's a very insightful read, and of course I highly recommend. It comes from me, highly recommended. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and ask you ladies, if you could name only one woman in history, just one. I know it's hard, but just one woman in history that made an impact on your life. Who is she and why did you choose her? This can be a local woman or any woman in U.S. history.
Okay, for me, I have to choose my mother. She seriously, she was a woman ahead of her time. She encouraged us. There are 7 girls in my family. So this, and she was very, very she was very insistent that we knew how to take care of ourselves. And she would always say, if you get a good husband, that's fine. But you need to be able to do it by yourself. You need to be able to do it. So she encouraged us to be educated, to be adventurous, to do whatever it is that we thought that we wanted to do. And of course, and my dad was just very supportive also. Only his thing was always, just don't go out there and mess up my name. Now, Dawn, I don't know if that means anything to you. You're kind of young, but the other ladies know exactly what Daddy was talking about. But my mother, she was ahead of her time. And I talk about that now. She was a never woman. People would come to her for advice. And as a kid, you know, you kind of sitting around listening and you're not supposed to be. But she was never a woman of gossip. And with 7 girls, she didn't allow us to do that. In fact, if we would come home and say, well, you know, and try to talk about, you know, little things that happen with girls at school, she said, no. A dog that brings a bone carries a bone. So don't get involved in that foolishness with that. And her other thing, and I use it with Taylor when Taylor was small, and I tell other people that, she would always say, everyone have a constitutional right to be a fool, but you don't have to join into their foolishness. So I find myself as I get older, I've got to be an old folk now. As I find myself getting older, I just pull upon that wisdom, but that is the most impactful person to me, you know, because, you know, I was just there and I live it and I saw the beauty of how she handled things and with the wisdom that she handled it. Now, she's a whole lot more diplomatic than I've ever been, but she taught me a lot.
Well, hey, excellent answer, and put me in the mind of Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. So beautiful. Yes. All right. Who else would like to share? Choosing just one person in history that could be
It's tough to just select one, but I think this is the one I would like to select. She just happened to be my deceased mother-in-law. And she was born in 1900, around 30 years before Ruth Ginsburg. Well, Ruth was born, I think, in 1933. So she was born in 1900. And she died in 1957 while in office. But in 1931, Governor Huey Long appointed Lucille May Grace Dent as registrar of state land in Louisiana. And she was reelected. She ran again, and she was reelected over the years, time and time again. And she was truly a trailblazer and communicated quite well with both women and men, which was unheard of at that time. And she served honorably. In 1932, she was the first woman elected to statewide office as a Democrat. And I have her memoirs on onion skin paper. And I'd like to just read, if you don't mind, just a quick excerpt. And these words were silenced by her death. She says, quote, Louisiana needs someone besides a politician to lead her out of the wilderness. She cries for a leader, fearless, courageous, with the ability to bring to the front in her rightful place a state as great as any, greater than many, with advantages of wealth, location, and beauty. Oh, for someone whose voice will come and lead us to the glories that Louisiana and we Louisianians are so justly entitled to. And I read last week in the newspaper that we're last on the list again. So I think it is past time that we get serious and start electing people that have the best interest of all the citizens, red, yellow, black, and white in our state, so we can move forward, even if we move up one rung of the ladder at a time. It's past time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And when you said her name, I remember reading a little bit about her when I was reading The Big Lie, Hellbog, Lucille May Grace, and Leander,
Perez.
yes, and that was a very intriguing read, and I do remember being very impressed with her.
Well,
Thank you.
she had a cheerleader in New Orleans that finally had a building named after her. It was, I think, I've forgotten which building it is downtown, but when Foster rebuilt the buildings downtown,
Mhm.
they changed it and named it something else without notifying anybody. But
Aw,
life, and she ended up having a really tough life. She ran for governor. She was the first woman to run for governor in the 1950s, and it was a tough ball game. She didn't win, but she came back strong, was reelected to Register of State Land, and then died in office. She died of scleroderma, which is just a terrible disease, but served honorably for many years, and she was a beautiful lady.
thank you. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Who would like to go next?
Don, I had a real tough decision to make because I wanted to stay in family, and then I knew that I'd have some contention beyond this time of lifting them up. So I was led to Reverend Mary Edith Moody, who I'm sure most of the people on this call recognize and know, and
Right.
have some interaction at some point. I was always impressed by certainly her intellectual ability, her call to ministry and what that meant, and the fact that she was able to build bridges and she had the respect of the entire community. What impressed me most, though, was her servanthood, what it meant for the local community in which she lived, and the tremendous amount of work she did with very little. Now, for most of us who worked with Reverend Moody during the years, she had a very small congregation, but she actually pastored a community. When you think about the extent of her work, I had the opportunity to work with her closely around a lot of the mission work. And certainly as we began to do some faith-based organizing, she had been doing it for years. So she taught us what that actually meant. And demonstrate how you would build bridges and what it meant to be community. And if there was ever a person that I think never really saw race, she knew who she was, she knew her family history, but she had a genuine love for all of God's people. And I was just tremendously impressed by that. And of course, she was a mentor in many ways, certainly to women who became part of the ministry. In terms of giving some guidance about how to step carefully, but also how to stand your ground and how to recognize that in terms of ministry, that was between you and God. If folk would respect the work that you did, the ministries that you led, and the way that you served God's people, that was the thing that meant most to her. And that's why I lift her up, because even in her absence, I find myself and others still talking about the things that we learned from her. And even as I look at the part of the community that she lived in and invested a lot in, not only to the African-American community, but those others who served in that community as well. So she's been a powerful influence, and even in death, she still is, as we remember her during this Black History time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Dr. Hendricks?
Well, this is really difficult. I thought about my mother, who but I have realized that Charlotte Michaelis, who was the lady who was in Auschwitz, and I babysat for her 2 little boys. I went to Catholic schools, and we were taught social justice and doing good works and so forth. But Charlotte showed me, number one, she was so intelligent. She was so forgiving. She was a survivor, because what they survived was unbelievable. And I was awestruck by the fact that she could be so forgiving. We had a German couple, and he had been in the German army that lived in our complex as well. And she was kinder to them than the other Americans there. And she helped a couple who were Catholic. The little boy had beaten up her little boy. She had no reason to do it, but they were going to be evicted. So she gave them the money, and I asked her why. And she said she couldn't see those children on the street. So in her actions, in everything that she did, and I didn't realize it at the time, but she influenced me so greatly, and I just couldn't imagine human beings treating each other so horribly. So Charlotte Michaelis, God bless her.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So then my next question is, how have you personally contributed to local history? Or for those who prefer not to toot one's own horn, how have you preserved local women's history for others to gain knowledge and insight? Uh, Judge Johnson, would you like to go ahead and share how you are a woman of history?
Well, you just do what you do, and that's what I've been taught, to just do what you do to try to help others. That's how you are raised. And and I suppose one milestone for me would be when we embarked upon the Clark versus Edwards case as one of the lawyers on that case, where we decided that we needed to change the judiciary.
Mhm.
When I first started practicing law, which hadn't been that long ago, just 42 years, which is not that long. There were not very many women in the profession. In fact, in my law school class, there were 5 of us.
Mhm.
There were not very many women. And then when we went to court, then you were not treated as the men, and particularly as white men were. So you had to do so much that other people didn't have to do. Now, when we look at that, you didn't have very many white women practicing law, not going to court. That is, you had white women who were lawyers, but they weren't necessarily going to court. So along with Judge Clark, Janice Clark, we decided that we should embark on changing that. And a lot of people know that Janice was also supposed to be one of the lawyers, but we decided that she may do better being the plaintiff, as we were to go around the state to explain why we were doing what we were doing. And that's just one of the things. So Janice Clark, that's how you get the case Clark v. Edwards, and which went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And it impacted not only having judges, an opportunity to have judges who of color or Black judges on the bench in Louisiana, but also in Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, parts of Georgia, and initially with Texas, so they decided with LULAC, which is Latinos Association, decided that they could do it by themselves. But we still here in Louisiana enjoy the privilege, or not being a privilege, or having the largest number of Black judges on the bench than any other state. So
Well,
I think that's kind of significant.
oh no, that's very significant.
Mhm.
Ma'am. And I mean, my own family, my own aunt,
Yeah, absolutely.
Chief Justice Sylvia Cooks of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, benefited directly from that. I wanted her to be able to join us today, but our
Mhm.
schedules are so adverse right now, and I had to get this done in the month of March. And so she was not able to join us today. Um, I mean, absolutely, yes, ma'am. That's very significant, and I appreciate. Thank you, and the team of lawyers that worked together to make that happen. And that was before you even became a judge yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well,
All right.
my mother, of course, my mother was a great French cook,
Uh-huh.
and she didn't teach me, and I didn't ask. So
Uh-huh.
cooking is not going to be being a great cook is not one of my legacies.
Uh-huh.
However, I have learned so much from all the men with whom I worked and learned how to communicate with them as best I can, and really have worked more with men during my career than women. But one of the things that I'm proud of is as a volunteer, I've served on the Center for Women in Government board and advisory board for over 30 years and met some marvelous women from all over our state and the United States. And also as a volunteer, I've co-authored one with Dawn Yu, contributed, and Dr. Hendricks. We took the 7 Ages of Man, Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man, and developed a presentation, a reader's theater called 7 Ages of Woman. And also another work that I collaborated with other women on is Louisiana's Leading Ladies was a reader's theater presentation where we took Phyllis Mayo's research from the 1960s and wrote a reader's theater presentation and presented that at the archives here in Baton Rouge. And that's when I met Dr. Hendricks. She came to the theater that evening. So I've been so blessed, had some wonderful mentors, one of whom I'd like to mention was Peggy Gore Cangelosi, who she was the first chair of the Hall of Fashion Ball, and I worked in cooperation with her over the years and just have learned so much, and also learned from all of my students as a teacher, and Dawn, and I'm learning from you every day. So I really have enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Did you want to touch on a couple of the ladies that you spotlighted in your work?
You know, well, we started with the nuns that came over from France. And of course, they were very colorful. They said the women in New Orleans that wore red lips and, women in New Orleans back then were ladies of the evening and quite colorful in more ways than one. And they came over and we shared their diaries, some of their diaries. Madam Walker, who was the first Black millionaire with her beauty products. Henrietta DeLille, I think, was one that we highlighted. Most of them were from history. And then we ended in the 1950s with Lucille May Grace. And it was just a marvelous. We worked with Dr. Schaefer, helped to write the script, and Phyllis and myself and Colleen Temple, Collis Temple's sister. And there were 4 characters. I was the director and co-author, and there were 4 readers and 1 narrator. Phyllis Mayo was the narrator. So we went through the ages, the decades, from early the settlement in Louisiana all the way through the 1950s.
All right. Now, would that be something that is recorded or people could get a copy of the script or something like
I
that?
think they record. I think Dr. Schaefer, who is at LSU still, I think she recorded it. I'm not sure. This was early on, we didn't have a lot of access to recordings and phones and at that time, but I could check into it. And it's something that could be revisited, you know, dusted off and recast and maybe revisit the issue. I'm always looking for a volunteer project.
Who else would like to share on that question?
Well, several things come to mind, but I know we're need to be cognizant of time. One that I think of that has made a tremendous impact in my life, the life of my family, and certainly in terms of this community. I very early on, as they began to integrate high schools back in 1965, there were 1 or 2 classes before, but they were either there 1 or 2 years. But we actually was part of a class that was at Baton Rouge High for 3 years in terms of that experience. And even till today, many of the African-American students who were part of the experience, they still meet together. And it's amazing to us what we saw as something that was so traumatic for such a long time in our life, took us to a place of being overachievers in many ways in terms of the fields of labor that we yet find ourselves in. So historically, as I think about that at the time, it was a risk, but it was something that we felt called to be able to be a part of doing and the change. But I had the opportunity not only to graduate from there, but also to have a grandchild who actually got recruited to Baton Rouge High and had the experience that helped me have an appreciation for the steps and that we took at that time. And then what we see now in terms of the school and through the years, we're still trying to fight to make sure there's some equity in terms of the number of African-American students who even now get to attend and have the benefits that we fought to make sure so many would have. So historically, I would think that that has some significance. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, and part of that is simply because Davis Rohr, one of the tremendous leader in the development of downtown Baton Rouge, we shared along with Raymond Jetson and Jennifer Riley in terms of being co-chairs for the development of Plan Baton Rouge. And the tremendous amount of work was done in that development that Kip Holden certainly led. I think many folk don't know or recognize many of the folk who are on the ground, because part of the responsibility I had, simply because a lot of folks said they had problems bringing African-American talent to that process, was to be able to make sure there were. And I wish I had time to name so many folk who were impactful. And even as what you see today is not just an effort of a small group of folk, but it was impacted by a large number of African-American folk in our community. And that leads me to be excited about a lot of what I see now among young talent, not just Black talent, but the collective work that's going on to make a difference.
Right. Well, I've got to talk about Louisiana Voices of Women Theater Company, which came from, I realized as I lived, I watched my mother's experience, and mine was, I went to Texas A&M. I graduated. I was one of the first women to graduate from Texas A&M. It was all male military. I went from an all-girls Catholic high school there with a little time in between acting on the stage. But I discovered the discrimination in my own life. I had seen it in my mother's. And I have a much better life than she had. But I decided that women were very definitely discriminated against. And I still think that from the beginning of time, women are the most discriminated against group. Then you come with racism. But I worked to support women, and to me, being a feminist, and I'm not afraid of the word,
No.
Is considering everybody, being fair to everybody, even though the world is not fair. As I always told my students, we can try and make it fair. So that's what I've tried to do. And in my social justice work with my students, because I was at Southern University, which taught me a tremendous amount, I did plays that were written by women, but then I did in social justice, the bus boycott. We wrote a play and did it on the 1953 bus boycott, on Katrina, and we worked with the Goodman Theater in Chicago, which is the oldest nonprofit theater in the country, and it's professional. We worked with them and my students went there. And then I started writing plays about women. And as you know, Dawn, Why Celebrate Women? You were in there and you have a wonderful monologue. She has a marvelous monologue in there and she was fantastic. I worked with Jennifer Jones Bridgett with Working Interfaith Network and just loved it. So Why Celebrate Women? And then the play that I want to focus on, but the final one that I did last year, Women Who Built Baton Rouge. Jennifer Jones Bridgett is in that. I have a monologue, but I started with Sarah Morgan and her biography. I did all kinds of research for it. But then there are women in between there. I ended with Mayor Broom.
Okay.
And I interviewed her. And from that, these are monologues. And there's so many women. Betty Lou Roundtree, God bless her soul, she died. She was a librarian, but so many women that are so important. Well, I took the social justice and my emphasis on women, and I wrote a play, and we did it down at the old state capitol. It's on the Laval Facebook page.
Okay.
It is, if anybody doesn't know, I hope they know, but last year was 100 years since women in this country got the vote. Way too, it should have been from the beginning of the country, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, I wrote this, I did a lot of research.
Okay.
Feminists celebrate suffragists 100 years of voting. It's on Laval or Louisiana Voices of Women Facebook page. It's streamed. I started with bell hooks and Gloria Steinem, and then went to Sojourner Truth, went to Harriet Tubman, went to Ida B. Wells Barnett, and then Mary, I'm always getting her, Mary Terrell.
Okay.
All right. And then Susan B. Anthony and Alice Paul.
Okay. Well, I mean, that sounds amazing. And you said it could be
the
found
women were amazing.
Yes. Well, yeah. And the work that you're doing to capture and make sure that people are aware of their work to preserve her story, I think is
right.
Fun. So we had a little bit of a late start, and I want to make sure I'm mindful of you all's time. You all committed to about an hour. So if we could just take the last 10 minutes at the most to get through the remainder, and then we'll close out The next question I had actually deals with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book. And it becomes very apparent that her husband was her backbone. During a time in history when a man being the backbone to a successful woman was not socially popular or even really thought of. You hear the phrase behind every good man is a good woman, but you don't necessarily hear the reverse. Right? And so, if you may, ladies, you may or may not have any thoughts around that at all, but if you do, have any thoughts around the significance her husband played, or any general thoughts on the difference spousal support can make for today's women? Again, you don't often hear it said that a man is the backbone or equal support to a woman, even in 2021. And so then, any insight, ladies?
Well, I don't want to take up all the time, but I have the most wonderful husband in the world. And this is the second marriage for me. He typed my dissertation. He went up to Harvard, to the New York Public Library with me. And he videotaped the last production that I did down at the old state capitol. He's an engineer, and artists and engineers, they say, are the opposite, but it's wonderful because we complement each other.
Mhm.
And I cannot, we've been together 37 years, and I think he is marvelous. He has helped me with all my productions. And, I've always loved men. I'm a feminist. And so anyway, but he's a Cuvion. He is from Louisiana.
Mhm.
And I'm from New York, and you would think that, opposites and all of that business, but no, he's just wonderful, and I just can't say enough.
That's beautiful that you share from your personal experience of having that kind of support. Did anybody else want to mention anything?
Well, as I looked at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I've listened to an interview with her husband before, and he talked about the first thing he noticed about her was her beauty,
Mhm.
and had a desire to want to get to know her. That then, once meeting her, then he was touched by her brilliance of
Mhm.
that, and from that on to then I think, and he talked about he always saw her, just being simply brilliant, which she was, but also her ability to do all of the things that we would think necessary in terms of going to law school, being a mother, and moving to support him. Also, when he finished law school, moving from school, going to another law school and getting admitted. So he talked about all of that. And I just thought that was just fantastic. So she moved with him and supported him, but he also supported her. And that's what it's all about.
Mhm.
Having practiced law with my husband for a long time, and we've been involved in a lot of law litigation and things of that, it's important to begin to see and respect each other, not
Right.
for your individual talents and your individual self, as opposed to, well, this is my wife, which it is, but that's when we're at home.
Mhm.
It's not when we're in the courtroom. It's not when we're in meeting rooms. It's not when all of those things are going on, and just have the mutual respect for each other and each other's talents. So I just think that's really important. And that's what I saw when I heard the interview with Mr. Ginsburg.
Yeah. I mean, he actively campaigned to help her in his own way get to be the Supreme Court Justice. I'm like,
Absolutely. And he was one of the biggest cheerleaders toward that.
yeah,
Mhm.
So I just think that's just fantastic when men have, having always been privileged, have the ability to say, well, recognize here, and not just think about, well, I need to be seen and I need to be on the forefront, but also say, yes, but look what's here with me.
yes.
Look what's here.
And I think it's especially insightful, given that, just like you said, I mean, he was an attorney himself,
Yes.
and he did not let his own aspirations hinder her and her ability and her success.
There was
And it takes a strong woman, a strong man to have a strong woman as his wife. And he has to be, self-confident in himself as does the woman. And I was business partner with my deceased husband, Fred Dent, for over 35 years. And he had a career of his own, and then we had our career together. And like Aileen, I've been blessed with a second marriage. Herb Sumrall, who was the director of civil service for many years, served honorably as a state employee for over 40 years. And he's also very supportive. As a matter of fact, I was a member of the Republican PEC, elected as a member of the Republican PEC, and Herb attended every meeting with me. And at the end of the meetings, he received a certificate as an honorary Republican. He's a Democrat, and he attended more meetings than some of the elected Republican members of the Republican PEC. So go figure. He was very supportive.
That's beautiful. Go
One of
ahead.
the things that I thought was important as I looked at that relationship and also her relationship with Aaliyah was the impact their support had in terms of she was already smart, she was already beautiful, she had a whole lot of things going for her, but that they took the risk, and sometimes some strong men have a way of actually doing that helps to provide the kind of exposure and support and acceptance and opportunity. And that made me think not about my former husband, but about my father in the ministry, Reverend Charles T. Smith. Being a woman in ministry some 30 years ago wasn't one certainly that you
Right.
had an easy road in terms of acceptance. And even in his leadership throughout the community, he took a risk. And of course now that risk has paid off in terms of women in the ministry. Even though his colleagues did not necessarily agree with him, they respected him. And that respect opened up a door and a gate for women in ministry in this community. Certainly we're not where we need to be. And there's a lot more work to do, but it was the strength of the relationship that he saw something in me, or he saw something in many, because he was the father in the ministry to many who are doing successful ministry even until this very day. So that relationship had some respect, which was the big piece, to recognize the gifts and talents and call up on, certainly upon her life, but how it took it to a different level because she had the kind of support from the men that were in her life,
Yes.
impact that they had.
Beautiful.
Very beautiful. And so that is the last question. I had one more question planned, but in the interest of time, we'll stop here. And that other question was simply, I know I put you in a bind by saying choose one woman to name. And so that last question was simply, anybody else that you felt bad about not mentioning? But in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you all so much for joining me. Again, I'm Madam Vice President Dawn Chanet Collins of the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board. I have enjoyed having you ladies with me on this month's Roundtable Talk with Dawn Chanet Collins. This month's focus, of course, being women's history from a local perspective. I appreciate you all so much for sharing your own personal stories, and giving insight about other amazing women in history. And also want to close out with the comment that Miss Jane Chandler put into the chat box, where she said that her father used to say, behind every successful woman is a man who tried to stop her.
They are very competitive.
Close out on, yes,
That was a good one.
yes, yes.
Amen.
That's it. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, ladies. It was,
I just want to say thank you to all of you. It's so good seeing you, all of
Yes.
you. And Elizabeth,
Well, I wish I
didn't
could
know
have
when
seen
speaking.
you.
Yeah.
It's
I
so
know.
great. And Elizabeth, as you were talking about Herb. I was saying, I thought Herb was a Democrat. Then I learned that what you were saying, he attended all the honorary Republicans.
Yeah.
yeah, he was. In fact, but we don't talk politics in our house. It's
Smart,
a no.
smart.
But we have a wonderful relationship. We have been so blessed. And I'm just, I've been so blessed today being with you all. I know Don, I know Ernest, my new friend from Shiloh, the Shiloh Church. And Dawn, thank you so much for including me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you all again, ladies, for joining me. I am indeed honored to have each and every last one of you join me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My sisters, brothers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.